Welcome, folks. This is Dave Rinebolt. I'm the Executive Director of Ohio Partners for Affordable Energy. And this is the first of a series of conversations we'll be having with folks who are active in the energy policy sphere in Ohio and in the Midwest more generally. We'll have both participants and very informed observers of the process. And in fact, today we're starting off with an observer of the process. Kathiann Kowalski is a reporter with the Energy News Network who focuses on Ohio. She's got a long background in energy and science related issues. She's the author of 25 books and also was a lawyer. So for a number of years. So we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today to talk about utility policy issues, and welcome, Kathy.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm speaking in my capacity as a journalist. I'm not advocating, but I report, and it's great to be here.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time. I want to start off with the threshold question. How did you become a writer on energy-related issues? What drew you in to this field?
I had been reporting on science and social issues already for a number of years. And about 15 years ago, people may remember we had this huge blackout in Ohio. And that was just about the same time that I had a proposal due for one of the magazines I was writing for on future power. And, you know, needless to say, I did not get that proposal in on time, but I sent the proposal in on that Monday and said, hey, I will write about this blackout. And that got me into finding out more about the grid and what happened. And it actually started here in Ohio. And after that, I was reporting on climate change more frequently. I did a book on alternative energy. And then around 2013, connected with the people at Energy News Network. And I've been doing pieces for them since, in addition to my other writing.
Well, I know you and I have had the opportunity to talk, and you've covered a number of the issues that we're interested in. And that brings me to the issues question. What do you view as the three major issues that we're facing in the utility world today?
Well, I'm going to focus mostly on Ohio right now because if I'm talking globally, the big issue is going to be a shift in energy away from fossil fuels that there's a lot of momentum for due to climate change. So that's kind of the overall global background issue. But if I'm looking in Ohio right now, there's the push to repeal House Bill 6. There's the renewable energy issue. Will it be able to compete on an even playing field? And there's also questions about genuine separation of distribution from generation for purposes of competition and making sure ratepayers are paying only for regulated services on that part of their bill. And I can go into those more.
Well, I think the deregulation issue is one that was very popular for a while, and Ohio was an early adopter of competition at the wholesale and retail level. And at least it's my observation that wholesale competition has worked pretty well in our region, while the results on retail competition are mixed to some degree. How do you view the effectiveness of competition and the advantages? Do you see advantages of it for residential customers or customers in general in Ohio?
There have been a lot of savings from the wholesale market. When you get down to the state level at the distribution level, it has varied in part because depending on which utility you're dealing with and the extent to which there was full divestiture from their affiliated generation early on. Ohio State did some research, Noah Dormady in particular, in which he and his colleagues looked at different impacts. And we actually had a calculator that they had provided as part of our series, and that was in Ion, Ohio, where you could go in and say, you know, how much more or less am I paying due to kind of different sorts of subsidies, either from one class of ratepayers to another, or money that seemed to be flowing back up to the parent and then possibly being available to subsidize affiliate generation. So that's it. That's an issue. To some extent, it's technically taken care of by now for the major utilities in Ohio. A caveat there, though, is that House Bill 6 has a baseline revenue provision in it tagged to 2018. And there are these electric security plans that are continuing, I think, mostly through 2022 to 2024. And those carry over some of those provisions that may allow some of these subsidies that the Ohio State team is looking at.
Well, you mentioned the subsidies too, and I think the subsidies create the tension between nuclear, coal, the conventional energy resources, and renewables. That tension is pretty clear in Ohio, where HB 6 repealed the renewable requirements and instead substituted subsidies for nuclear plants. But do you think that competitive market where regulated utilities no longer invest in generation and power plants, do you see that as inhibiting the transition to renewable energy in Ohio, or as keeping the door open for us to continue to generate or to bring more renewable energy online?
That's a complex question, in part because it's not just House Bill 6 that has affected the ability for renewable energy to come into Ohio. About 6 years ago, you saw this drastic reduction in the growth of land-based wind energy in Ohio. You also have had questions arise in terms of siting of solar. Solar has continued to grow, but there are still some questions about, are they being approved on the same level that various advocates have raised? So that's kind of a backdrop and a way of saying it's not just whether there's competition or not competition going on. One of the things that you've seen in Indiana, for example, is more utility investment in renewable energy where they have a guarantee of revenues for it. But in Ohio, I think if you do have competition, there are certainly, it seems to me at least, that there are certainly commercial providers that are willing to come in and build and operate those facilities if they're able to compete on a level playing field. The question that I've heard from a lot of them is that that's not quite so clear right now.
Okay. If I may, let me pivot a little bit to an issue that's near and dear to the hearts of OPAE and its members, and that's energy efficiency. You know, as you probably are aware, Ohio has the third largest low income efficiency program collectively in the country. And we like to think we do a pretty good job. Are you seeing indications that because of House Bill 6 and its elimination of the efficiency mandates, that efficiency is going to go away in Ohio, at least on the electric side? Or do you think that utilities are likely to continue to propose investments in energy efficiency?
It's unclear. Certainly, there are going to continue to be market pressures for energy efficiency. One issue on the utility side is we have seen some hints in, I think it might be House Bill 247, but I would have to double check that utilities might want to come back in and propose some programs if they can get paid for that. But the question then is, would that be preferencing some of their programs over others? How would that work in terms of an affiliate doing it versus them? So there are open questions on how that would work. One of the issues that the standard did was it pretty much had set targets that utilities had to meet. All of the utilities were meeting that with no problem. And there had been estimates from the Environmental Law and Policy Center and Ohio Environmental Council that on average, those standards had been saving Ohioans about $3.60 a month. And that was when you netted out anything that ratepayers were paying for them as part of their bills to cover the programs. And then there was an additional $2 per month for pretty much all ratepayers that was attributable to savings from reducing the demand through what had to be procured. And that was based on how the regional grid prices the value of different sorts of energy. So it was that pushing down the total demand so that you would have a lower clearing price for that also energy.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've probably seen it. I know that AEP, American Electric Power Ohio, has proposed a new DSM portfolio. As you've talked to players here in Ohio, do you see a positive future for utility proposed portfolios, demand side management efforts, even though there aren't any standards anymore?
I mean, people I think generally would love that. And the question is, how are they compensated? How are they paid? To the extent there is energy efficiency, there's certainly a demand for it. People don't want their bills to be any higher. Clean energy advocates see benefits there. So I think there is going to be some pressure for utilities to offer that. And if they don't, I think there will be more push then to try to get something more mandatory if it's not otherwise provided.
Well, we know that energy efficiency is a key mechanism for helping protect low-income customers from rate increases and to make energy more affordable. We know that energy poverty remains a critical issue, however, and it's one that's been exacerbated by the COVID-19 crisis. What strategies are you seeing utilities embracing to deal with that kind of situation? I mean, will we be visited by widespread disconnections? I'm seeing that in the press that 35 million people may be eligible and disconnected soon. What are you seeing as you look across the industry when it comes to COVID-19 and energy poverty issues?
It's a big problem. Right now, when I looked up the Ohio unemployment figures, as of June, there were 392,000 more Ohioans unemployed than in June 2019. So when you're looking at something like 631,000 people out of work as of June, that's a lot of people in addition to those who were already struggling in low income groups. That's a lot more people having problems meeting their regular utility bills, their rent, their mortgages. So this is a very big problem. So far, what we've seen mostly is utilities having had temporary forbearance on making utility disconnections, some waiving of late fees, some waiving of a few disconnect or reconnect fees. But as disconnections are allowed to restart in Ohio, it seems there's a lot more that could be done, and not just from the utilities perspectives, but also perhaps on the regulatory end. And we're really not seeing much on the legislative end yet. But different proposals I've seen thrown about might include things for, not just are you waiving or forbearing fees, but can you get out in front and maybe try to get people put on percentage of income payment plans or other plans proactively, rather than once somebody has racked up $1,000 in utility bills. Can you perhaps go and, you can't discriminate on your fees right now, other than to the extent allowed by the percentage of income plans. But can utilities and regulators go out and try to make some targeted efforts in neighborhoods where they know there are historically a lot of disconnections, a lot of problems with paying bills, and again, try to proactively get programs put in for people to make payments easier, or get more energy efficiency measures targeted on a wider basis. And I know there are also efforts to try to look into solar co-ops for certain low-income areas, where the idea would be that those people who are subscribing to it would get the benefits of lower utility bills by having offsets and being able to reap that in their communities.
Well, I think that is a clear recognition of the reality that community solar or solar co-ops can provide energy, electricity at a price that is below what we're seeing in the wholesale marketplace. And so it does represent a savings to customers, and connecting low-income customers with the cheapest energy just seems to make sense to me.
And that's true to a large extent. And I think we'll be seeing more efforts to try to get that. One concept that was floated to me when I was recently interviewing somebody at the NAACP was this concept that certain things should be perhaps baseline. And I don't know how that would be put into practice, but the idea that was being put forth from this woman at the NAACP was that electricity is like water. It's a basic necessity, and should there be some floor?
Well, and I think that comment is on point. Energy is an essential service. It is like housing. It is part of housing,
Right.
Water and everything else. So let me bring it to my last question for you. I'm going to ask you to prognosticate a little bit on what we're going to see in the future. Could you give me a sense of what the you see as the major or as the major changes that we're going to see in the utility industry over the next 4 or 5 years?
Um, I think there are going to be ongoing shifts away from coal and towards renewables largely as a market factor. That's even independent of who wins elections in November. Um, Coal was declining in large part in the market for years before, from at least the last 10 years, coal had been declining as a market matter. And I think that's going to continue, and renewables have been growing. Part of that is, where you have clean energy standards that provides an incentive and a market mechanism to try to even things out, because traditionally coal and gas have utility built-in generation fees going back previously. I think there is going to be continued pressure for action on climate change. That would likely take place faster if there are changes in some political leadership. I think you're going to see some affirmation of a competitive market, that because people like having the ability to choose who they're going to get their energy from. And I think you're also going to see, given what we've had in the experience with House Bill 6, I think there's going to be a push for more transparency for people to see what's going on, who's pushing for subsidies, are things being bailed out, who's gaining what in the utility space.
I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today, and I wish you best of luck going forward. I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you over time, and thanks for all you do.
I appreciate it, and thank you to OPAE and all your partners for the work you all are doing on behalf of vulnerable people in Ohio.